Welcome to Family History Mysteries, a podcast that tells the stories uncovered through family history research, the unexpected stories of everyday people. I am an avid family historian who has been compiling my family tree for over 15 years, with nearly 20,000 people recorded in my trees.
Episode 60, The Tin House. 2 years ago, a fantastic photo of a house was shown on the Deniliquin District Historical Society Facebook page. The photo was of a house that was made out of flattened kerosene tins. The house was nicknamed Plume House, no doubt because Plume was the brand of the kerosene tins. The photo was taken of a glass negative, so is excellent in quality, and it captured my attention as I was intrigued to find more about the man that built it and his family. The man that built the home was Alexander Wilkie Wilson, and he was born on the 29th of April 1846 in Wapping, London. Alexander's father, George, was a shipwright, and his mother was Jessie Wilkie, hence Alexander's middle name. Alexander was in the Royal Navy, and it's quite possible that he jumped ship as there's no official immigration record for him. It's estimated that he arrived in Australia around 1866 as a 20-year-old, quite possibly with his sister Jane. His father, George, had arrived in Australia after the death of Alexander's mother. He came out on the Wanata, arriving in Melbourne on the 4th of October 1852. By 1866, George was mining for gold at Opossum Gully near Heathcote, Victoria, and it seems that Alexander and Jane joined up with their father in Heathcote. There's an article from the 8th of November 1866. An accident and escape. On Wednesday last, a miner named George Wilson was literally buried alive while mining at Opossum Gully. He was working in old ground near an old road formerly used by Mrs. Aiken puddlers. He was at the bottom of the shaft when the ground gave way, and he remained buried alive until his daughter, on visiting the spot, found that the ground where her father had been working had fallen in on him. She gave the alarm, and in a short time a number of miners and puddlers set to work to dig him out, a process which occupied some hours and required particular care in consequence of the nature of the ground. It was found that a large block of earth had in falling caught the side of the hole and was held there. The man was under it. Had it gone down, it would have crushed him. As it was, some smaller pieces of earth alone struck him, and when the efforts of the people to release him had been successful, it was found that he was only very slightly injured. George Wilson was at the Prince of Wales Hotel, Heathcote, on the 4th of November 1868, and this is where he died, only at the age of 58. And the title of the article outlining his death says, "Shocking Case of Accidental Poisoning." A most distressing case of accidental poisoning occurred at Heathcote on Wednesday night about 10 o'clock. A man named George Wilson, an old and well-known resident of Heathcote, went on Wednesday night to the Prince of Wales Hotel, where he called for a glass of whiskey. He was served by a little girl named Lise, and as soon as he drank it, he exclaimed, "I am poisoned." He expired in a few minutes before even medical assistance could be procured. The landlord of the hotel, Mr. Jackson, was absent when the sad occurrence took place. It appears that Mr. Jackson, who is an amateur photographer, has been into the habit of keeping the materials used in the art in the bar at one end on the shelves of which the bottles used in his trade were ranged. He had put some diluted cyanide of potassium in a whiskey bottle, and the bottle, by some means it would appear, was shifted from the corner where it was placed by Mr. Jackson, and the girl gave the unfortunate man some of the deadly fluid instead of whiskey, and in a few minutes he was lifeless. The disaster has cast a gloom over the neighbourhood. It is only natural that people should censure anyone for keeping dangerous chemical preparations in the bar of a public house. Still, a strong feeling of genuine sympathy and commiseration with the unfortunate landlord is so mixed with censure as to modify its severity and destroy anger by producing sorrow. The deceased leaves a son and a daughter to mourn his loss. So a shocking and unfortunate incident. So Alexander went on to marry Eleanor Sanderson at the manse in Heathcote in Victoria in 1874, so 6 years after his father's death. Eleanor had come out from England, and Alexander listed himself as a minor at the time of their marriage. They had 3 girls, 2 of them survived infancy, and by the late 1870s the family had moved to Deniliquin, where their 3rd child was born in 1879. Eleanor died when their youngest child was only a year old, at the age of 29. By the 21st of August 1880, he had married again to Margaret Edwards in Deniliquin. He was 34 and Margaret 17. Margaret had been born in Wangaratta and her father, John, was a sawyer. They had 14 children together. 3 of them did not survive infancy, including one set of twins. So all up, Alexander had 17 children, and 14 of those children lived into adulthood. One local historical book says that it's quite possible that it's the largest family that has been born in Deniliquin. Margaret acted as a midwife and also was a laundress in addition to bringing up a large family. Alexander worked at the Deniliquin and Moama Railway up until his retirement, and he died on the 19th of May 1932 at his Morris Street home, aged 86. So Alexander and Eleanor Sanderson's children. The first child, Isabella Emily, also known as Isabella Amelia, was born on the 23rd of July 1872 at Reedsdale, Victoria. She married Michael Corby in South Australia on the 4th of November 1895, but it was registered in Victoria. They moved to Melbourne, then to Perth, Western Australia in around 1903, and then Leederville from 1910, where Michael was a metal worker. They had 4 boys together. Michael died in 1942 at Leederville when he was 73, and then Isabella then married a Mr. Carlson, and Isabella died in Perth in 1956, aged 83. Jessie Catherine was born in Heathcote on the 13th of July 1875. There is no record of her death, but it is presumed that she had died as a baby, as she's not named on her father's death certificate. Ada Constance, known as Connie, was born on the 28th of August 1879 in Deniliquin. She married Robert John Quirk at the Wesleyan Parsonage in Deniliquin on the 24th of December 1895. Ada was 16 and Robert was 28. They had 3 children, John, Constance and Miles. They lived at Gulper Creek Station after their marriage and then moved to Deniliquin until March 1906, when they then moved to Melbourne. Ada reports in divorce records of Robert's drinking and his refusal to support her, and her having to gain work to support herself and the children. Robert had left the home in January 1913. They lived together on and off until Robert left for good in December 1914. They divorced on the 27th of September 1919. Constance was working as a tailoring manufacturer and living with her son John in Brunswick at the time of the divorce, and Robert was an employee of the Metropolitan Gas Company. Constance then went on to marry Edward Marsh on the 13th of November 1919 in Melbourne, so only 2 months after her divorce. Alexander and Margaret Edwards' children. Their first children were stillborn twins, born in Deniliquin in 1881. Their second child, Alexander George, known as Alec, was born on the 26th of January 1883 in Deniliquin. He joined World War I in Cootamundra, New South Wales on the 2nd of May 1916. He was working as a labourer at Oaklands, New South Wales at the time of his enlistment. He served in France and was discharged on the 1st of July 1919. And in the Pastoral Times, the local Deniliquin paper, there was an article on Alexander. And the title of the article states, Alexander served in France. In the lead up to Remembrance Day on November 11, the Deniliquin Genealogy Society has provided profiles of local soldiers. This is the third of 4 articles. Alexander George Wilson was born in Deniliquin on the 26th of January 1883. He was 32 years and 3 months when he enlisted at Cootamundra, and he named his father Alexander Wilkie Wilson as his next of kin. He was described as a natural-born British subject, never convicted by the civil power, served or been discharged from any army previously, nor been married or served as an apprentice. His army service number was 6374 and the enlisting officer was Lieutenant E. Brown. He was 6'1" in height, 14 stone, with a fair complexion, blue eyes and light brown hair. He was Presbyterian and enlisted as a private soldier. His records noted he had a scar on his right groin as a distinctive mark. Alexander embarked for France from Sydney on the 9th of September 1916 on the Euripides and disembarked in Portsmouth on October the 26th with the fellow members of the B Company, 1st Battalion, where he embarked for France from Folkestone on the 4th of February 1917. He was wounded in action in Étaples on May 6, 1917 in France, with multiple injuries to his arm. He was sent back to Colchester Military Hospital and returned to action in July of that year. In August 1918, he contracted influenza and was confined to hospital until the 12th of October. He was repatriated to Australia on the Lancashire in March 1919. Alexander worked at numerous labouring jobs and also horsebreaking. Alec married Marianne Ivy Maud Mullins, an Aboriginal woman, whose family featured in bonus episode number 3, The Ladies from Warringesta. And he married her in 1936. He was 53 and Mary was 34. Mary was known as Ivy, and she'd been previously married to William Jones and had 6 children to him. Alec and Ivy had 3 children before they officially married. The first child born in 1930, another in 1931 and another in 1934, and then they had another 2 children after they married. And sadly, like many of our returned soldiers, he did not keep good health and died of pneumonia in Deniliquin on the 24th of October 1938. And when Alec died of pneumonia at such a young age, his youngest child, Sydney, was only a year old. The third child of Alexander and Margaret Edwards was John Henry. He was born on the 29th of March 1885 in Deniliquin. He married Ivy Newman Wakeling in Leederville, Western Australia in 1911. He quite possibly went over with his sister Isabella and her husband. They lived at Victoria Park and he was a horse driver. John died in 1937 in Perth, aged 52, and they had 1 child, Aileen. The fourth child, Thomas Robert, was born on the 3rd of February 1888 in Deniliquin. He also quite possibly went over to Western Australia with his sister Isabella and her husband and his brother John. He married Ethel Hagan in Leederville, Western Australia on the 23rd of March 1911. Thomas was a fireman. They came back over to the eastern states and were living in Dubbo in 1913 and then in North Melbourne after 1919. They had 4 children and Thomas died in Melbourne on the 25th of October 1928, aged only 40. The fifth child, Benjamin Charles, was born in Deniliquin on the 8th of July 1890. He married Adeline Evans in Hawkesburn, Victoria on the 5th of October 1912. They had 5 children and Ben died in Essendon, Victoria on the 16th of July 1948. The sixth child, George William, he was born on the 15th of March 1892 in Deniliquin. He enlisted in World War I on the 18th of September 1914 at Deniliquin. He served at Gallipoli, Moscow, Damascus and Egypt. On the 6th of July 1915 he was promoted to corporal. George was wounded on the 1st of December 1917 with a bayonet wound to his right eye and face. He was discharged on the 16th of October 1919 due to these wounds. And George returned to Deniliquin. He was a quiet man who never married and spoke freely of his experiences in the war. He lived with his parents until 1949, where he had a vegetable cart selling door to door. He was then a caretaker in Duncan Street, Deniliquin in the 1950s. For many years he was an usher at the local picture theatre at the Deniliquin Town Hall. He also worked for Lance Lloyd. He helped deliver auctioned goods after sale. He died on the 31st of January 1961 in Deniliquin, aged 68. Annie Jane, known as Jean, she was born on the 27th of November 1865 in Deniliquin. She died in 1958 in Elmore, Victoria. She had married James Gray Hackett in Victoria in 1919, and they had a daughter, Mary, that was known as Molly. They lived in North Fitzroy in 1921 until the 1930s, where James was a salesman. The eighth child, Emily Margaret, was born on the 11th of July 1896 at Mathara, New South Wales. She married Alexander Allen Cameron on the 4th of April 1913 at North Deniliquin at the residence of Mr. Edwards when she was 16. They had 4 children, 2 who survived infancy, and Alexander died in May 1920, so only 7 years after they married. And the article that outlines Alexander's death was in the local paper. Fatal accident. Quite a gloom was cast over the town on Wednesday afternoon when the news was announced that Alexander Alan Cameron, better known as Son, had died at his home in North Deniliquin at 2:30 p.m. that afternoon from the effects of injuries received by a fall from a wagon on the Conago Road on the previous day. From particulars obtained by the police and supplied to the coroner, it appears that the deceased and John Hurd, a carrier, had taken a load of fodder to some sheep which were in charge of a drover named W. Coburn on the Conago Road, 13 miles from Deniliquin. They were returning to town. The deceased was driving and was sitting on the front of the wagon with his feet on the frame. Hurd was in the wagon with the deceased and Coburn was riding alongside on the horseback. The frame on which the deceased's feet were resting apparently slipped and he turned a complete somersault, landing on the ground. Both wheels of the wagon passed over him from the left shoulder towards the right thigh. The deceased was taken to his home by motor car, where he was examined by Dr. Palmer, who stated that his injuries consisted of a broken arm, crushed liver, and injuries to the stomach, besides minor abrasions and scratches. Death was due to heart failure caused by injuries received. Hurd, upon being interviewed, stated he was with the deceased on the wagon, but he did not see what caused him to fall. Coburn, however, saw the whole occurrence. The report further stated that there was nothing to suggest that the occurrence was other than accidental, and so far as could be ascertained, there was no blame attached to any person. The deceased was very popular and he had been employed as a herdsman by the municipal council for many years. He was 29 years of age and leaves a wife and 3 children, and also 2 sisters to mourn his loss, to whom we extend our deepest sympathy. And on the 18th of June 1920, so a month after his death, on Monday evening last, a public meeting convened by the Mayor was held at the council chambers with the object of considering means of assisting the widow and family of the late Alexander Alan Cameron, who died a few weeks ago as a result of an accident. After a conversational discussion, it was unanimously decided that a subscription list be opened in the room, that circulars inviting subscriptions be printed, and other means which the committee might deem necessary adopted for the definite object of providing a home for Mrs. Cameron and her family. Emily went on to marry Henry James Dankert in Yass on the 12th of January 1944 when she was 47. Henry had been previously married and divorced, and Emily died on the 20th of August 1990 in Deniliquin. The 9th child, Ruby Isabella, was born on the 2nd of June 1898 in Moama, New South Wales. She married Herbert Victor Evans, who was a saddler. Herbert enlisted in World War I on the 8th of June 1915 and fought in Gallipoli in France. He arrived in Melbourne on the 8th of June 1919. He married Ruby in Victoria in 1933. At the time, Herbert had a farm at Kajallico, New South Wales that he called Evandale. Bert and Ruby had 2 children, Marcus and Margaret. Bert then enlisted in World War II at Royal Park. In 1942, they were living at Tatura, Victoria, and by 1949, he was back working as a saddler in Deniliquin. Ruby died in Deniliquin on the 20th of September 1985, aged 87. The 10th child, William Wilkie, known as Bill, was born on the 2nd of December 1900. Bill died in 1928 in Deniliquin, and he's buried with his parents and his brother Rupert. And there was a small announcement of his death on the 3rd of July 1928. Mr. William Wilson, son of Mr. and Mrs. Alex Wilson of North Deniliquin, died on Sunday evening at the district hospital from rheumatic fever. He was well known in the Deniliquin district and was 27 years of age. The 11th child, Edward Robert, known as Ted, was born on the 3rd of March 1903 in Deniliquin. He married Lila Freeman in Victoria in 1927 and they had 3 boys. Edward listed in World War II on the 24th of May 1940. While he was at war, Lily moved from Deniliquin to Richmond in Victoria. Edward disembarked at Rabaul on the 3rd of May 1941. He was reported missing on the 24th of April 1942, and by the 1st of July 1942 it was ascertained they'd been taken prisoner by the Japanese on the ship Montevideo off the island of Maru. His youngest son was only 6 years old when he died. The 12th child, Charlotte Margaret, was born in 1908 in Deniliquin. She died in 1975 in Deniliquin. She had married Horace Rupert Matthews in Deniliquin in 1929. Horace was a boot repairer and he died in Deniliquin in 1956. Charlotte died in 1974 in Deniliquin and they had 2 children, Trevor and Sonia. The 13th child, Rupert Charles, was born on the 6th of February 1910, the last child of the family, born when Margaret was 46 and Alexander was 63. He died in 1911 in Deniliquin and is buried with his parents and his brother William. And there are many descendants living in Deniliquin today. And just a note on the siblings of Alexander Wilson. As mentioned earlier, Alexander's older siblings, brother Thomas and his younger sisters Janet and Anne, stayed in London, England. However, Alexander's sister Jane came out to Australia with her brother, it is presumed, around 1866. So Jane Wilkie Wilson was born in 1845 in Dundee, Scotland, and she was a year older than Alexander. She married Benjamin William Blomfield in Heathcote, Victoria on the 10th of April 1869 when she was 24, only 5 months after her father's death. Benjamin was born in London and he lived in Spring Creek in 1868 and he became a coffee merchant in Elizabeth Street, Melbourne. His brother John originally owned the business, but he became bankrupt in 1881, so it's assumed that Benjamin took it over. They lived at Emerald Hill, which is now known as South Melbourne. They had 7 children together, and Jane died on the 16th of October 1892, aged only 47, only 8 months after her youngest child was born. And Benjamin himself declared bankruptcy in September 1892. And there's an article on the 17th of October 1892, Blomfield. On the 16th of October at her residence, 107 Barclay Street, West Brunswick, Jane Wilkie, the beloved wife of Benjamin William Blomfield, daughter of the late George Wilson of Heathcote, aged 47 years. And their children, the first child born to Jane and Ben, George, and he was born on the 10th of October 1869 at Spring Creek. He was a litho printer and he married Lillian Holmes in Victoria in 1900 when he was 31 and Lillian 22. They had 2 children and George died on the 11th of December 1910 in Victoria, aged only 41. Lillian remarried in 1912 and had a further 2 children. Sarah Ada was born at Emerald Hill, Victoria in 1871 and died in 1890 in Brunswick, Victoria, aged 19. Jessie Florence was born in 1873 at Emerald Hill. She had a daughter, Beatrice May Blomfield, in 1894 in Rushworth, Victoria. And Jessie died in Mooroopna, Victoria on the 28th of June 1897, aged only 24. Ellen Elizabeth was born in 1874 in Emerald Hill and died at the age of 2 years in 1876. Annie Isabella was born in 1877 in Essendon, Victoria. She married Frederick Oscar Olsen in 1895 in Victoria when she was 18 and he was 29. Frederick was a gravedigger and they lived at Campbellfield. They had 2 children with 1 surviving childhood. Annie died in Coburg, Victoria in 1945, aged 68. The 6th child, William Benjamin, was born on the 14th of July 1880 in Brunswick. He died at the age of 8 on the 26th of September 1888. And there was an article outlining his death. A magisterial inquiry was held on Friday morning at Barclay Street, Brunswick, before Mr. W. Straw, JP, touching the death of a little boy named William Benjamin Blomfield, 8 years and 5 months old, who met with an accident whilst playing with other children on Boxing Day. Jessie Blomfield, the sister of the deceased, deposed that on the above date, in company with her little brother, she went to a neighbour's garden to have a swing. The deceased climbed up a poplar tree to which the swing was attached, when suddenly the branch broke and the child fell to the ground. The cause of death was concussion of the brain. And the 7th child of Benjamin and Julia was Arthur Edwin Samuel, and he was born in 1892 and died on the 27th of February 1893 of meningitis at Albert Park, Victoria, aged only 11 months and 3 days. So out of their 7 children, only 3 of them went on to live until adulthood and have children of their own. So out of that one negative that the Deniliquin Genealogy Society placed on their Facebook page, I've been able to track who the owner of the house was and his very interesting story of him and his family.
If you are interested in sharing your story on my podcast Family History Mysteries, please go to my Facebook page and send me a message. If you would like some assistance in filling in the gaps in your family tree to see what mysteries you solve, please get in touch. And don't forget, you can have early access to episodes by subscribing, and you'll also gain access to bonus episodes.